Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Dr. Liz DeVetta and I'm really excited to be here today to present hashtag Our Bodies Are Not the Problem, Women's Bodies, Rape Culture, and the Need to Be Free, Art as Research, which is the very long official title of this project. I am with Jessica Reeves and Tiffany Maria, and our other co-PI, Katie Jacobson, is unfortunately not with us today. She's not feeling well, but she's with us virtually, so we hope she feels better. And I want to give some brief thank yous to some folks, although they're not able to be with us today either, but it's important to thank the people that have been supportive of the work that we have been doing for many months. I want to thank the English Department Chair, Brian Whaley, and Dean Stephen Clark for their support of this project in its early stages, for recommending me in the nomination process. I want to thank the Grants for Engaged Learning Committee and the Office of Engaged Learning, and President Jimenez and the Office of the President for selecting this project to receive a Presidential Faculty Award, which is what enabled us to have the funds to pay the student researchers and develop the project to what you will see today. I also want to thank Betsy Libert for being an amazing support throughout. She's our admin and has been incredible, so thank you so much for your work on the back end, Betsy. I also want to thank my partner, Jeremy Sortor, who is in charge of recording and Zoom. This is his third go-around with this project, so he has been part of this project from the beginning, which was 2018, and he has witnessed the evolution and growth of this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I want to thank my co-PIs, Jessica and Katie, for being an incredibly collaborative partnership. I don't know, trio is probably better. We have had, I have had an amazing time getting to co-work with you on developing this project into what we have creatively and intellectually made it. And so I'm really honored for that. And I want to thank Tiffany especially for jumping in last minute to read on in Katie's stead, since Katie, like I said, is not able to be here today. So a quick little bit of context for this project. As I said, this project has been ongoing since 2018. It began as a solo spoken word piece that I wrote in response to a student, and actually several students, who had come to me and shared stories of rape and sexual assault that was profoundly disturbing. Just at the beginning of Me Too, and so I had a couple of students in my office on a Friday afternoon. Over the weekend, Me Too blew up, and so many women and people with uteruses that I know were posting their stories on social media, and it was everywhere. And by the time I woke up on that Monday morning, I was angry. And I thought, well, I gotta do something with this anger. So I did what I do, I wrote. I started writing. I wrote a series of poems that then became a longer spoken word piece that I presented in January of 2018 at an interdisciplinary conference and won an award for that. And then Jeremy and I staged it that summer and took it into an international conference in London, where it received really great feedback. People thought what an important story this is to tell, and how much we need this kind of storytelling in the world, because we have an issue, right, with violence against women and gender-based violence. So fast forward to about a year ago, a little over a year ago, there were some situations that occurred in our community, both in Orem and Salt Lake, but also in our campus community, that spurred me to revive the original piece. And I called in 6 other women who were interested in sharing their stories, some of them for the first time. And we presented a Zoom version of Our Bodies Are Not the Problem 2021. And that was a compilation of the original spoken word piece with the other women's stories mixed in, told with the voices of 7 women. And then fast forward to this current year, I was granted a Presidential Faculty Award to develop this into a much deeper research experience. And so what we did was we created a 2-part qualitative survey, and respondents were asked to answer a series of questions anonymously. And then the second part of the survey asked for some longer form writing from the participants who had stories that they wanted to share in more detail. And so what you will see today is the creative piece of this creative theoretical project. We can talk about some of the numbers and the data that came out of the responses later if folks have questions about that. But this is the creative part, because this is a humanities-based project, and we are all English majors. We did a lot of visual rhetoric as well as created a script. So that being said, I am going to just give you a little note about the script, and then we'll get started. So the script is developed directly from responses to the open-ended questions on the qualitative survey. Only slight changes have been made to grammar and spelling for clarity. All of the language is the original language used by each respondent. And this version of the script is developed for 3 voices using a combination of similar responses between survey participants to create a conversation that represents the universality of experiences between people with uteruses in terms of gender-based violence, rape culture, toxic masculinity, and the intersections of these oppressions. In order to avoid speaking for others whose identity we, as the researchers, do not share, we have not included the very important voices of the respondents who are assigned female at birth in the script, and have instead included their words on the slides for the audience to read. Let's get started. Before we do jump in, a little content advisory is important. Make sure that you stay safe. You may step out at any point. There will be some themes of sexual violence, including rape, assault, physical, emotional, verbal abuse, and religious trauma. References to disordered eating, some strong language, some sexually objectifying images, and references to self-harm. If you do need resources or someone you know needs resources, please reach out to one of the organizations in our area, either the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the YWCA, South Valley Services, or the Rape Recovery Center Crisis Line.
dancing with ghosts, mine, yours, hers, theirs, haunted by the history of hurt. Hurtling through the hell of remembering, exorcism is not easy. Our bodies are not the problem.
It's boys that are scared they're not man enough, manning up to some ideal that always being in control is necessary. Never let them see you cry. Emotion is weakness, and we'll save that shit for them, pussies. Pound down the pain, pretend it's not there, take it out on her, them, me.
In the dark, behind a dumpster, locked in a stall, in someone's basement, in my apartment. Debase us in favor of feeling the truth. Assault us like we are the salt in your festering wound, wound so tight. Our bodies are not the problem.
It's being told to be pure, to wait until marriage, to not give away the milk for the cow, to wait, to be the Madonna and not the whore. There is no happy medium. You are either too much or not enough, but you are still the target of so much rage, so much shame, so much unadulterated fear.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
In 2018, Hannah Gadsby said, "There is nothing stronger than a broken woman who has rebuilt herself." I wish we lived in a world where these words did not ring true, where these words did not hold so much meaning for so many of us who identify as women in a world that was not built for us. A world that has been built by and for those who seek to control, manipulate, and oppress those who are deemed different, weaker, and seen as less than. A world that still relies on the power structure of patriarchy to create rules and codes that do not serve humanity, but rather a few. Too many women and others have been broken by the codes of patriarchy, and while I ever hate to think of anyone being broken, the truth is that many of us have had experiences that have rendered us shattered emotionally, physically, psychically, financially, and intellectually. Experiences that have shamed and silenced us. Experiences that have made us believe we are worthless. Experiences that have rendered us unable to move forward. Experiences that no one wants to hear about. Experiences that we wish we could forget. But these experiences, when we find the words to speak them, are the experiences that can help us rebuild. And rebuilding begins when we begin to tell our stories and shatter the walls of silence that have been imposed upon us for too long. Walls that the patriarchy has built to keep us small, to keep us contained, to keep us diminished. Walls that devalue us because there are no mirrors to magnify the truth, no mirrors to magnify the imbalances, no mirrors to reflect the world that needs to change.
I think my perception of the way the world was very skewed since I was little. I grew up with intense access to social media, which is heavily liberal, and was told very strongly that because I was a woman, I was oppressed, and that men were evil. I spent so much of my time wallowing in hatred for the society others had told me was oppressing me. It took me a long time to figure out that on a micro scale, my day-to-day interactions with people were not oppressive in nature, and they, such as evil white straight men, weren't lurking in the shadows, but I was just simply terrified of the dark because of bedtime stories.
I agree that often no one wants to hear about her or our experiences. People prefer to assume that they don't exist or blatantly deny the existence in the face of facts. I learned this at a young age when no one wanted to hear about my experiences of abuse. I currently work in child welfare, and when I started in my position, many of my friends and acquaintances made comments stating that it would be difficult to hear about the things that people were experiencing. I responded stating that listening to the experiences isn't what's difficult. What's difficult is that the experience occurred in the first place.
I kept many experiences to myself until one day my grandmother made a comment about how broken my siblings and I must have had some bad genetics or something. I snapped at her, probably a little too harshly, about the abuse that I feel my parents and other adults just swept under the rug. She looked at me, and in tears, she said that she was sorry, and that I had been abused, and if she could move me right into her house that instant, so I didn't have to be around it anymore. At 30 years old, that was the first time anyone had validated my experiences and didn't try to hush it up. And let me tell you, that release and her reaction was exactly what I needed to throw off the shame and guilt enough to find myself a therapist and get some healing done. I am a firm believer that one must purge oneself of bad experiences through talking about them in order for the light to come and fill those places in. There are some unhealthy ways to do that, but for the most part, I think being able to say it and have it validated is what focuses the power to conquer these things. It's like being unable to wholly process an emotion until you have a name for it. Once you've named your struggles, you can see them and understand them, accept them and release them, and move on. We help others do the same by being those listeners without judgment and condemnation, who validate the realness of experience in a world full of gaslighting and lies. Therapy is a wonder, and I recommend it to everyone, regardless of how much you think you need it. There is always a healthy strategy or way to care for oneself, or way to look at the world to learn.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Being a woman in Utah? Well, it can be difficult and challenging, but I guess it could be worse. You have to be on your guard. It's hard for me and many women due to the excessive and restrictive expectations of women and the persistent sexism many of us experience daily. Being a woman in Utah is confusing. It's different.
Being a woman in Utah is being anxious all the time about my looks, opinions, and personality. Still, it is better than being a woman in some other extremist countries, and I'm appreciative of the opportunities I have, even if people think it's a bad idea that I'm a feminist.
Being a woman in Utah is like living in the 1950s. Not much has changed except we have better hair care products. It's just one of the worst states in the union for women and women's health. I guess it's not the worst, but it certainly isn't the best. It feels like there's one group or another. There's no spaces between being the perfect LDS wife or old maid and a hedonistic anti-Mormon, at least as some things like dating sites go. It's complicated and it's exhausting. I was raised within the LDS church, and the teachings of being the ideal submissive wife has destroyed a lot of my perceptions on life. I carry a lot of trauma from it, such as not knowing how to say no. It's something expected by my community, even if I try to stand up and refuse the idea.
Yeah, being a woman in Utah is very oppressive and controlling and discounts everything about me. Because women are not given the same opportunities, pay, or treatment in any aspect of their lives compared to males. I feel suppressed on a daily basis because I often feel shamed for being comfortable in my sexuality. Being a woman in Utah can be scary, and it's been so hard. It's driven me to go in disguise sometimes, just to try and escape the sexual harassment I get when I have a feminine presence.
Being a woman in Utah is unrealistic and terrifying for me.
Being a woman in Utah is confusing, painful, and silent until you find other women to scream and dance with.
Being a woman in Utah means I am oppressed every day.
Being a woman in Utah is silence. Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
As a woman, I believe that the value I have in society depends on my looks. I believe this because of my experiences in high school. In high school, being asked to dances meant you were attractive. The media said this, and many other things about how a girl should look. I've been getting condescending comments about my looks, my weight, and how I act.
I believe my value in society depends on A, the value with which I treat myself, and B, that every human has an intrinsic value if you live your life believing you're worthless and your actions follow suit, then people notice this and they might treat you in that same way. You must have respect for yourself and expect respect from others. And if you're lucky, the respect will stem naturally. If it doesn't, you must demand it.
As a woman, I believe that the value I have in society depends upon my ability to have children. I was raised Mormon, and we were taught that a woman's only purpose was to have children and be obedient to God and her husband. I've been questioning my sexuality this past year, and I believe I am asexual. I've also never wanted children, but in the culture I live in, marrying a man and giving birth are the only goals I should have. It's really difficult to feel like I matter when I want neither of those things.
I know that the value that I have in society depends on me, the contribution I make, and how I'm able to assist others. However, society doesn't always place the same value on my contribution as I place on it. As I said, I currently work in child welfare, and I know that I make an impact in the work I do every day. However, often what's valued in society isn't the contribution that's being made, but rather the financial gain that others achieve as a result. So in child welfare, if it's not helping others and it's not a money pit, not a capital gain.
My looks, Instagram, filters, Photoshop, none of this is new. Women have been excluded for so long, it feels like there isn't enough room at the table for all of us. So we pit ourselves against each other for utter nonsense like beauty standards, which are just bullshit meant to make you buy things, and are mercurial abstractions created by society that change on a whim and are based in no real fact or truth, so that we can be worth something. You know who that benefits? Not you, not other women. The only people who benefit from beauty standards are the rich, the corporations, and sometimes men. Instead of working to make things fair, we get distracted by stupid hierarchies that divide us and waste our time and energy trying to one-up one another so we are desirable. Even though there is room enough for everyone to flourish, if we would just put our energies into making it happen. I've been on both sides of beautiful, and let me tell you, it is a privilege. It is real. And it's usually not men. When I was thin and beautiful, it seemed like more women saw me as a threat than they do now that I'm overweight. They were nicer, but not in a kind, genuine way. Being fat is great because it makes me pretty much invisible. And yes, there are rude remarks about my size, but the women who are nice to me are genuinely kind. For some reason, it's easier to have female friends that are as the ugly chick, whereas none of my male friends give a crap.
What is your definition of rape culture?
Rape culture means treating rape as a subject for jokes. It's a culture that promotes forcible sexual advances, even with verbal and obvious signs of disinterest by one or more parties, then congratulates the aggressor. It's the glorification of rape and anything that perpetuates or makes rape more palatable. It's when men perceive all women as sex objects who mean yes, even when they say no. Rape culture is the he said, she said arguments and it's jokes about assault that no one refutes. It's the sexualizing of young children. And rapists don't face much, if any, punishment, while women, we're told assault is our fault. It's taunting and pretending it's okay for men to act on their natural instincts of sexually harassing feminine people. It's the normalization of rape and sexual violence because of the idea that boys will be boys or some similar way of thinking.
Rape culture is the idea of a group of people have around rape and sexual violence to normalize and leave a space for nonchalant acceptance towards something that is horrible just because it's common. To me, rape culture is when men's actions are excused or diminished, dismissed on the basis that they can't control themselves. When rape and sexual assault is normalized and the victims are blamed more than their perpetrators, it's men taking advantage of women sexually for status, power, or because they feel like they deserve it and only valuing people based on their sexual potential. It's the habits of a community as a whole to discount the seriousness and frequency of sexual assault in their community.
Rape culture means accepting rape as a part of the culture because it's so common. It's the culture of ill jokes and something to almost be expected to happen to yourself at some point in your life. That and the lack of attention given to it since it's viewed as not being a big issue. So most people think it's just something that happens and you have to get over it when it shouldn't be. Rape culture is a society that trivializes sexual abuse and assault. Rape culture is missing one's power. Rape culture is when no one cares or bats an eye when they find out someone has been sexually assaulted.
Rape culture is a term that describes how violence against and domination of women is deeply ingrained in people's mindsets, in entertainment, in the media, where it's okay to joke about treating people as objects for one's pleasure and excuses are made. Jokes reveal attitudes, and attitudes cause movements. It's when no one, meaning all you good men out there, gets up and says, hey, that's not okay. That is also rape culture. Not fighting against the objectification and mistreatment of women is rape culture. And that extends all the way through society, from the politics of abortion to the fact that girls' toddler shorts are half the length of boys, because that objectifies little girls too. Rape culture is domination over a woman's body and not listening to her voice. Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
So, can we discuss toxic masculinity?
Masculinity is the gender feature we use to describe males. And toxic masculinity is when a person is masculine to an extreme extent and exaggerates those features in a damaging way. Men and women can both feature toxic masculinity, as women are not just feminine and men are not just masculine, but a mixture. There's also toxic femininity. Men feel power because they are men. From what I see, it's when the idealized traits of masculinity are turned up enough that it becomes toxic, not only to the person, but the people around them, and affects their views of the world and around them. The world around them. It's having the expectation that someone should act according to societal norms, specifically men being expected to behave and present themselves as masculine. I know many men who are affected by this, but I also think it is an expectation is internalized by assigned female at birth folks, as well as to like masculinity and believe that masculinity is over them in some way.
We hurt girls through hurting boys, and hurt boys through hurting girls, denying males the humanness of their emotions, non-sexual, physical, and emotional intimacy, and close friendships. We force them into the one and only acceptable outlet, the use of women's bodies as their only source of self-expression, validation, and intimacy, which they then end up treating as their own personal pleasure playground because they can't get their needs met anywhere else, according to the standards of toxic masculinity. It's also found in phrases like "you throw like a girl," or things like pussy or bitch. You ever notice that most insults to a man actually insult his mother or his wife or his sister? Somehow, being feminine or like a girl is bad by default, even though there are women who can do all sorts of things better than most men can. Not to mention, women and girls are not seen as whole people. It's always Mrs. So-and-so or Lady Doctor. Why are these things still pointed out? I know it may seem trivial, but norms are the most powerful thing in culture. And these insults, labels, and salutary honorifics are still the norm, and they do a hell of a lot more damage than we think they do.
It's men feeling like they can say or do what they want to women. I see a lot of it just talking to men. I also experience it a lot when I tell people I'm a psych major. I find men making backhanded comments and saying things like I can't imagine them ever saying to another man. It has been persistent throughout my dating life. For me, toxic masculinity means a male that exhibits toxic behavior towards others, especially towards women. It's men who need to act or perform in a certain way, who care more about how they present to other men than they care about moral integrity. Men have acted like they've had the right to do what they please because they're men, and that's just how men are. And they've treated me like it's my duty as a female to please them. I have often seen guys act in harmful ways toward women because they believe it's how their peers expect them to act. Toxic masculinity is domineering and ugly.
Toxic masculinity to me is toxic men belittling women only on a basis that they are women. It shows up a lot in video games, in online video games. It shows up everywhere, in gyms, in the classroom, in dating and discussions about masculinity. It means excessive expression of masculinity, dominance, control that negatively affects both male and female roles in terms of relationships, communication, and identity. It's the bro culture and misogyny that shows up in my workplace. It shows up everywhere. It means abuse of power, silencing my experience, writing me off as emotional, hurting men I love because it restricts them from feeling emotions, teaching unhealthy ways of coping with emotions, the dismissal of violence, and very little education about consent. It shows up everywhere. I mean, white male privilege founded this country.
Toxic masculinity is also a pattern of attitudes and ways of behaving that are stereotypically associated with or expected of men, particularly when they have a negative impact on society as a whole, but it's also detrimental to men. It shows up on the macro level in my life as laws and regulations that negatively impact me as a woman, such as anti-abortion legislation, lack of funding for women's health care research, and lax prosecution of sex offenders. It shows up at the mezzo level in my life as the institutionalized patriarchal society which we live and exist in Utah, due in large part to the influence of the predominant religion of the state. On a micro level, it shows up in my husband's inability to express his feelings to me for fear of appearing weak. It's the idea that a male is born smarter, stronger, and more capable of handling certain tasks or aspects of life better than women. It shows up in my LDS religion and family every day. It's the idea that men feel like they have a right to do what they want, even at the expense of others. Men can be angry at me and treat me a certain way, but I can't do the same. If I say I'm treated a certain way, it's almost always met with, well, did you do something to deserve it? Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem. What about hypersexualization and the media? Femaleness in patriarchal culture marks us from the very beginning as unworthy or not as worthy. And it should come to no surprise that we learn to worry most as girls, as women, about whether we are worthy of love.
So we buy into the byproducts of our own self-doubt. Buying into the byproduct of an upbringing that says we can earn the right to be loved, we must earn the right to be loved. That femaleness just isn't enough when faced with the patriarchy's second-class standard that says, be good.
And being good means being diminished, being dependent, deferring, delaying, disappearing. Being good for our parents so that they can be happy that their daughter is a good woman. Being good for a man so that he can say what a good woman he has, because for those of us who are positioned as coming after, happiness means following somebody else's goods. And somebody else's goods leave us no room to find our own. Our sense of self relies on being owned. Instead of ownership, we sell ourselves.
We swallow the cultural message that women's bodies are for taking, forgetting that they and we are human too. Our bodies have become vessels detached completely from any humanity.
On billboards, in magazines, commercialized, capitalized on, categorized, classified, characterized as less than, closed off even from ourselves.
Vessels to be controlled and kept silent. I will not be a handmaiden, made to hand over the sanctity of choice, the security of my IUD, or an education.
We swallow the patriarchal reflux of minimization that comes as easily as breathing to them, silent and swift, that says, you're overreacting, don't be ridiculous, you don't understand.
A tiny smirk, an exasperated sigh, perhaps an eye roll, the institutional strategy of patriarchal gaslighting that starts first as a nervous response, responding to decades of handwriting, that's more like a drum, an underlying hum of misogyny, and it begins with belittling.
Girls can be cute, but they're not serious human beings. They're weak. neurotic, and will try to control you through seduction and emotional manipulation, which is all they have talent for. Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
I do think there is hypersexualization of women in the media, and sometimes it can be frustrating. I think everyone does it though, including the women. Take Lizzo, for example. Lizzo claims that she's a fighter for women and demanding respect, yet most of her posts of social media are of her naked and sexual poses. Most female rap artists dress loosely, and they have had heavy, excessive physical work done on themselves to make them beautiful. Billie Eilish used to wear baggy clothes, but as she grows more popular, she becomes more and more revealing. The hypersexualization is not from the men, only necessarily, and is heavily brought on by women who want to appease their audience. It's their choice, I guess.
Yeah, I have felt the pressure to conform to beauty standards and be pretty or sexy, yet anyone who does conform is labeled as slutty. Or I've had people in my family call women prostitutes for dressing in what they perceive as sexualized clothing. So yes, I have felt affected. It feels as though it's everywhere in all the media, and if you don't look perfect, then you're ugly. I feel this so much, and it hurts. Like when I was younger, and I didn't wear makeup, I got made fun of for it. And then when I did wear makeup, I got catcalled and similar unwanted attention. I feel like the hypersexualization of women in the media impacts all women, as it impacts the perception of women by their peers, both male and female.
This poem is beautiful. I think it comes down to the fact that women have removed from the sphere of person. Getting back in is so hard because of this catch-22. Nobody pays you any mind if you are not hypersexualized. But once you are immediately pegged as an object. I used to be talked down to all the time when I was conventionally pretty. But now that I'm not, people notice me less. But when I made myself noticed, I'm taken more seriously, for the most part. There's no space between dumpy prude that nobody wants around and super hot babe that everyone wants to be around. But the second version is meant to be seen, not heard.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Should I hide my body so it doesn't make you uncomfortable? Hide until even I no longer recognize myself?
Should I hide my body so it doesn't tempt you to lose control?
Hide so that I don't have to explain myself?
Hide so that I don't have to prove anything?
Hide so that I don't have to face the shame I'm taught to feel?
Hide so that someone else's life won't be disrupted because I spoke truth that fell on deaf ears?
Is it because I smiled at you and you thought that was an invitation? Or because I refused to and that made you angry?
Did accepting a dinner invitation mean access to what's mine and only mine?
Should I feel fearful of my status as a female for the fact that my femaleness is my fault?
Should I stay at home and cry myself to sleep feeling dirty and confused?
Should I cut my skin to feel pain that I can identify in order to have scars that show?
Should I eat too much or not enough to mask the wounds that won't go away?
Should I shave my head or bind my breasts to mask the evidence of who I am?
Should I remain a doll child, transferred from father to husband, living like a poor woman from hand to mouth, existing merely to perform tricks? Living in a playroom, waiting to be told what to do and how to behave, foregoing a sense of duty to myself in deference to my sacred duties.
And what do you consider my most sacred duties? Duties to my husband? My children? I have other duties just as sacred. Duties to myself. I believe that before all else, I am a reasonable human being, just as you are.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
So the Mormon church is led by white men. All the high-up callings in the church are for men. Men are supposed to be the providers for the family, and a woman is supposed to be obedient to her husband. All of this has made me feel insignificant in the church. Before I became an atheist, I always felt like God didn't care about me because I was a woman. Another thing is you have to have these one-on-one meetings with men in closed rooms and talk about your sins together. This is a very vulnerable space. And I have always felt as though I was less than the man who was in the room with me because he has a higher church calling and must be more favored by God. So, yeah, that was really traumatizing.
My religious group is patriarchal. I have found that men don't want to believe the negative things about other men. When information is shared that they don't want to hear, they choose to disregard it and just believe it, even literally labeling it as untrue. This has been problematic for me and my own experiences.
Yeah, well, it allowed my older brother to physically and sexually abuse 4 of his siblings for years. Not being allowed to be in a church building without a priesthood holder, regardless of the number of women, is garbage. I think that it makes it even more dangerous. Also, why are dudes so freaking interested in protecting and shaming the virginity of girls, and yet put all the responsibility on them instead of the boys and men who are trying to take it from them? Why do women not have any acceptable sexual identity, even within marriage? I cannot trust in a God who allows his daughters to be treated this way, who puts them in positions of vulnerability and then blames them for what others do to coerce them to do. The double standards regarding women's sexuality within religion are disgusting.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
What negative or limiting messages have you received because you are a woman?
Number 1, I'm not funny. Number 2, I can't play video games. And number 3, I can't wear a tank top because it distracts men.
Oh, from a male student on an evaluation. She should not be teaching, but rather at home and having babies.
I've been told that my career doesn't matter because I'm a woman, and I will end up working anyway. When I have said I didn't want children, I've been told that God put me here just to have children, and if I don't, I will be disobeying him. I've also been told that sex isn't an optional thing, and that when I marry my husband and my husband wants it, I am to participate whether I want to or not.
I've also been told by my family that I'd be prettier with makeup on. I don't wear makeup. When I was a teen, my boobs started growing kind of big and guys started calling me titties, as if that was my name.
The message that I receive as a woman is that nothing I can do will ever be as good as a man, and that if it's recognized as such, it is because of unfair advantage or affirmative action type situations. It's very disheartening.
You're not worthy of love in any shape or form if you do not conform to the standards of beauty set up by your society. You are not worth anything unless you are clean and pure, whether or not it's by your choice or understanding. But men don't have to live up to that same standard. They are worth something no matter what. You are only good for something if you are taking care of others, which includes having a husband and children. Once you have been used by a man, marriage or otherwise, then you are worthless. Your only purpose is to have children. If your husband leaves you, all the burden is on you. You have never been enough because you are already behind.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem. Do you believe that stereotypical gender roles have disrupted your ability to achieve goals in education, your career, your personal life?
I don't know if they have disrupted them, but I've had people ask me why I bother going to school because I'm supposed to just have children. I definitely feel as though I'm not valued in the workplace, but regardless, I'm still going to school and trying to achieve my career. I also feel the gender wage gap impacts my opportunities. If I don't earn as much as a man, it's more difficult for me to pay for things such as supporting my family while getting an education. This also directly impacts equity in my career. In my current position, I have noticed that all of the administration positions are typically held by males, and all of the frontline positions are typically held by females. This is discouraging and limiting.
Yeah, I agree. I remember working at a specific job in which the general manager stated that the warehouse workers earn more money than the office workers because they have families to support. Well, there are numerous valid reasons why warehouse workers might get paid more, but the gender-identified role is definitely not one of them, nor it should be. So when I first went back to school, I was able to do so because I qualified for a program in the Department of Workforce Services. But because I knew the gender expectation was for me to take care of the children, I took them with me and put them in the on-campus daycare when I was in class. Despite taking care of the kids full-time, working full-time, and being a full-time student, my husband felt that it was not an appropriate course of action for me. Similarly, when I would take evening jobs, he would refuse to care for the children during that time frame, stating that I needed to work 9 to 5 and put the kids in daycare, which of course it was against because it wasn't financially practical. And I was also putting them in daycare for that length of time.
Yes. I was taught my whole growing up that I should just expect a man to marry me and make me a housewife, because that was the inevitable outcome of how things are. And every time I tried to educate myself in case of an otherwise situation, I got shot down and told that I didn't need the information or skill, and truly deprived the ability to be independent. It was always implied that a man will make you whole. You can't be complete without being married, and that has damaged my self-worth so much.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
My favorite color is purple. It's the color of amethysts and rich wine. It's also the color I see behind my eyes when I close them, hoping that tonight maybe I'll get some sleep.
My favorite color is blue. It's the color of summer skies and the deep ocean. It's also the color of the tears that won't stop coming when I look in the mirror, knowing that I am both too much and not enough to matter in the world.
My favorite color is green. It is the color of the grass after a cool rain. It is also the color of the polo of the boy who thought my no meant yes.
And with God at their side, the men take aim for an ideal built of men's stubborn shame under the guise of godliness, nothing holy, nothing whole.
Nothing but thinking that although she knew what anger looked like, she had no idea what it might feel like. She always did what she was told.
And so she lost herself in the day-to-day, in the idea of who she was according to him, according to them.
In accordance with the strict rules, ruling nothing, just overruled,
Overrun,
overripe,
overindulgent,
overwrought.
over it.
but maybe she had failed at being a woman. She deserved whatever she got.
Pills, punches,
Insomnia, instability,
Miscarriage, mistake,
misery.
punishment.
pain.
Where is paradise when everything is dying, death, dead?
When we are empty, soulless, barren.
When we are wanton, willful, wicked.
And they are steadfast, righteous, and wrong, and everything that worries them must come from women.
What is your 8 rock? Do you dare confront it and set it free? Or do you double down in the complicity of conspiracy, choosing us over them, choosing anger over understanding? There is futility in fury.
All of his intimate conversations had been wordless ones, or brandishing ones with male companions until they flowed like ingots, hot and misshapen, too heavy to hold back, too late to reconsider.
8 rock is blindness, to reason, to difference, to shame.
And he is the kind of man who set himself up to judge, rout, and even destroy the needy, the defenseless, the different.
8 rock is purgatory, the opposite of paradise. Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem. Being a non-skinny female has been especially difficult. I have been through a lot of gender-based trauma, including rape as a child. It has changed everything about me and how I interact with men. but I can never use it as a justification because I'm not allowed to talk about rape. It affects my daily life, yet only a handful of people know about it. In many of my experiences, I was told it was my fault, and eventually I started to believe that. It took me years to understand and learn that it wasn't my fault. But it is still terrifying for me to speak up when things happen because I don't want to hear it's my fault anymore.
I feel like I've been pressured into things, and also that I'm treated poorly for standing up and being a feminist.
My story is one of few within my community, and one that my family, friends, and loved ones tend to share. It's horrible, but something that we've all had to grow and just accept in order to provide safety for those around us.
10 years ago, when I started my college experience, I was threatened by a classmate because I wouldn't go out with him. The class we shared was a night class. I got out at 10 p.m. and had a half an hour walk across campus in the dark, alone. And I was terrified to go to class. In fact, I skipped. Even now, I don't know what I should have done, so I could have gone to class. I mean, what are the resources UVU offers in situations like that? Who would I have contacted? Would they have believed me? Would anything have been done? What? Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem. I've been raped many times. Most of the time, I didn't tell anyone because it didn't seem to do any good. One time, I came forward about it because the person who sexually assaulted me was in a group with me, and that was triggering my PTSD. The people I confided in said that I must have done something to make the other person think that I wanted sex. They basically blamed me for it, which for a while I believed. I thought that it was my fault that I got sexually assaulted, that it was such a traumatic experience, and that kind of thing is worse than just keeping it to myself. If I think I'm going to get blamed for what I was wearing when I was attacked, I know I'll have less emotional pain if I don't tell anyone, even though it hurts too much to keep it inside.
I married when I was 19 and remained married for 6 years in a physically and sexually abusive marriage. I would wake up having my clothes disheveled and unbuttoned or to non-consensual sexual activity taking place. My ex-husband threatened to kidnap my children and was physically violent to me when I was holding them. I did call law enforcement when he threatened to kidnap the children. He told them that he was simply trying to remove the children from the situation because I was hysterical. In fact, I was hysterical because he had explicitly stated that he was kidnapping the children and then attempted to leave with them. Law enforcement took no action and inappropriately involved my 3-year-old by telling him to encourage us to get along.
From the ages of 11 to 17, I was physically and sexually abused by my older brother, and it was worse for my sister. My mother, who said she just couldn't believe he would behave that way, despite 4 children telling her the same, told me that it was my fault because I couldn't get along and there was something wrong with me. The one time my teacher asked me about the bruises, I was so embarrassed that I lied because I worried that it really was my fault. She believes her precious firstborn son could never do those things. She said, "That's just how older brothers are." When I complained of the abuse, except he did for years, I didn't know this until later, but aunts, uncles, cousins, friends all refused to come to our house because of him. But no one ever did anything or said anything that brought the situation to light. My sister went to the bishop weekly for years because of the problems at home. And while I don't know what was discussed exactly in those meetings, I know he didn't say jack that got my parents or anyone else involved. I didn't tell anyone because if my own mother, who was often in the house when it was happening, didn't believe me, then who would?
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem. I am wailing wall of women's voices.
I am intersectional as functionally possible as I navigate the privilege of my whiteness.
I am trying to redefine what sexy is in this capitalistic, sexist, and misogynistic maelstrom.
I will not be a wallflower wilting woefully while in the world whirls past.
I will not stand down. I will stand up with those of us who stand outside the circle of this society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are Black, who are older.
I will stand alone, perhaps unpopular, sometimes reviled to make common cause with all those other identified outside the structures of power, to define and seek a world in which we can all flourish.
In order to take our differences and make them strengths, understanding that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, unless we still define the master's house as our only source of support.
Maybe if all the women in this room, in this state, across these United States, united with all of us others who have ever been othered or over or undermothered, smothered by the patriarchy's pestilent pride, maybe then we could rewrite the script, because our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Our bodies are not the problem.
Thank you. That is the conclusion of the staged reading portion of our program. We have two pieces of other creative work that have been done both by Katie and Jess. And I'm going to share a slideshow of the collages that Katie made and give you a little brief overview of that piece of the work before we shift to the Q&A. Okay, so Katie says that the collage project was a way for her to demonstrate the way that women are looked at in our society. And so she created several collages about sexual assault and speaking up about these traumatic experiences because that seems to be a constant struggle. This is true. She also did a few that highlight the sexualized clothing or poses that many women express in magazines, which teaches everyone that women are sex objects and nothing more. She also felt it was important to highlight the beauty of diversity when it came to age, old age, young girls, weight, ethnicity, etc. And she wanted to demonstrate that women of all shapes, sizes, and colors are valued and needed in society. The purpose of this project, this creation of visual rhetoric, was to both demonstrate the way that media can create unjust subconscious beliefs about what women are and how they should look and behave, but also as an active protest that by using the magazines to show that change is a possibility and is a necessary one.
I also created some pieces of artwork. I have 5 pieces here that are all very different, but all about the same issues. This one is a collage, much like Katie's. I have used many different art forms with it, and I really like how this piece turned out. At the very top, very prominent in this piece is every voice counts. We're using our voices today, and we hope that as you guys see this performance that you will stand up and use your voice as well. This next piece I have titled Curves. It's a painting that I have done of a woman's body with handprints over her genitals and her breasts as a way to show how sexualized women have become. This one is called The Aftermath. It is an abstract piece. I've never done artwork of this style. It is meant to be the face of a woman after she has been sexually assaulted and is in complete and utter chaos. So this is the aftermath of what she would be feeling after a sexual assault. This fourth one is a painting. This one's one of my favorites that I have done, is a painting of a vagina. It is named Channel of Pleasure. In hopes I want to create a series of this using women of different ethnicities. This last piece is a sculpture that I did of a woman's breasts, and I put butterflies on it. And I painted it gold. I wanted to show that it's something that's beautiful. It doesn't have to be sexualized. It's a body. We all have bodies. We all have breasts. Women, this is just who we are. And it's beautiful. It doesn't have to be what men make it.
Thank you. We want to thank everyone for being with us today, and we'd like to open up for a brief Q&A if folks have comments or questions, but we're going to stop the recording for that portion. Thank you for joining us.